Allison didn't tell Dan or Christine about what she had seen on the bridge that night. She couldn't. They needed to believe it was over, needed the relief after weeks of terror. But inside, Allison knew the truth. Elias Crow wasn't finished with her. The whispers followed her. At first, they came only at night, faint and almost indistinguishable from the hum of the wind outside her window. But soon, they began creeping into the day. In the quiet of the café, while she poured coffee for customers, she would hear a low murmur in her ear. Child of light. When she dropped a plate one afternoon, the shatter startled Christine, who was sitting in the corner with her homework. "Ollie, what's wrong?" she asked gently. "Nothing," Allison lied, forcing a shaky smile. "Just tired." But her hands trembled long after. Dan noticed it too. "You're pale. You barely eat. You hardly sleep," he said one evening when they met at the park. His voice was softer than usual, stripped of his usual bravado. "Whatever happened in that chapel? It's not over for you, is it?" Allison opened her mouth to deny it, but her throat closed. Tears stung her eyes. She shook her head, whispering, "He's still here. I hear him. I feel him. It's like," she pressed her hand to her chest, "it's like he's inside me." Dan froze. His jaw tightened. "Then we figure this out. Together. We don't leave you to fight this alone." For the first time, Allison wanted to believe that. That night, her dreams returned, stronger, more vivid than ever. She was back in the chapel, though it was whole now, restored, its walls gleaming with torchlight. The pews were filled with shadowy figures, faceless, whispering in unison. At the pulpit stood Elias Crow. Not a shadow, not smoke, but fully formed, alive. His eyes burned with dark fire as he raised his hands toward her. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice both a question and a command. "The bond between us. I gave you my mark." Allison tried to move, to run, but her body was frozen. She looked down, and there it was, a symbol burned faintly into her skin, glowing red on her wrist. The same spirals carved into the altar. "You destroyed my vessel," Elias said, smiling cruelly. "So I planted the seed in you." Allison screamed, and woke up in her bed, drenched in sweat. But the terror didn't end when she woke, because on her wrist, faint but real, was the mark. The next morning, she sat with Dan and Christine in the library, her sleeve pulled up to show them. The symbol seemed to shift faintly in the light, like it was alive. Christine covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Oh my God!" Dan slammed his fist against the table. "That bastard. He marked you like you're his anchor." Allison's voice shook. "He said he planted a seed, but he's inside me now. I don't know how long before." Her words broke. "Before he takes me." The three sat in heavy silence, the reality pressing down on them. Elias Crow wasn't gone. He had only changed his prison. Christine whispered, "Then we need to find a way to break the mark before it's too late." Allison nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't know how much time she had left, but she knew one thing for certain. Elias Crow was waiting, and he was patient. The shadow over the toe. The library smelled of old wood and paper, a place of quiet that usually calmed Allison. But now the silence pressed down on her like a weight. The mark on her wrist burned faintly under her sleeve, a reminder of Elias's voice whispering in her dreams. Christine flipped anxiously through dusty records, her hands trembling. There has to be something, some ritual, anything that explains how to undo this. Dan leaned against the table, his jaw clenched tight. "We don't undo it. We rip it out of her by force if we have to. Whatever this thing is, it's a curse, and curses can be broken." Allison tried to steady her voice, but fear leaked through. "What if it's not that simple? He's inside me. He said I was his anchor. What if destroying the mark destroys me too?" Christine froze, her eyes flicking to Allison's pale face. "Don't say that. There has to be another way." Hours passed as they combed through the archives. Finally, Christine pulled out a cracked, leather-bound journal. "Look," she whispered. The journal belonged to one of Elias Crow's former followers. Pages filled with shaky handwriting spoke of their master's promises: eternal life, freedom from death, glory beyond the grave. But toward the end, the tone shifted. The words grew frantic, desperate. He bound us. Not to heaven, but to him. His shadow devours us. We are not free. We are trapped in his mark. Whoever carries his sign shall carry him. And when the vessel dies, he lives again. Alison's stomach turned cold. The vessel, her voice shook. That's me. Dan cursed under his breath and slammed the journal shut. So that's it? He marked you so that when you die, he gets another chance at life? He's trying to make you his resurrection. Alison's chest tightened. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. It made too much sense. Christine's hands fluttered over the pages. Wait, there's more. She read aloud. The bond can only be broken where the river took him. His body lost, but his curse tied to the water. Return to the current. Spill the marked one's blood upon the river, and the seed will drown. The three sat in stunned silence. Dan finally spat out, No way. We're not spilling your blood. That's not happening. Alison's throat went dry. But if we don't, then he'll keep growing inside me. And when it's too late, he won't just come back. He'll use me to stay. Christine's voice trembled. The journal doesn't say how much blood. Maybe it doesn't mean death. Maybe just enough to weaken him. Dan shook his head, his face pale. Or maybe it does mean death. Maybe that's exactly what he wants. He tricks us into sacrificing Alison so he can walk free again. Alison closed her eyes. She could still feel Elias inside her, faint but steady like a second heartbeat. She didn't know how long she had before he took full control, but she did know one thing. The river was calling. That night, Alison dreamed again. She stood on Riverston Bridge, the water below raging black and endless. Elias appeared beside her, no longer a faceless shadow but a man, tall and gaunt, his eyes glowing with terrible hunger. He leaned close, his breath cold against her skin. When the river drinks your blood, child of light, I will rise again. Alison jerked awake, clutching her wrist. The mark burned hotter than ever, glowing faintly in the dark. The choice was clear. To break the curse, she would have to return to the river where Elias had been taken. But whether it would save her or kill her, she didn't know. And time was running out. The shadow over the town. The days blurred into one another. Alison barely slept. When she did, the dreams came sharper, darker. She would wake to find the mark on her wrist glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Sometimes in the silence of her room, she swore she heard whispers inside her skull. Not from outside at all. You can't resist forever. The river is waiting. She stopped telling Christine and Dan every detail. Their worried faces made the burden worse, and she already felt as though her life wasn't her own. One cold October evening, the three of them met again on Riverston Bridge. The sun had sunk, leaving streaks of purple and red across the sky, and a lamppost hummed faintly in the growing darkness. Christine carried the journal pressed to her chest, like a holy book. This is all we have, she said quietly. The river took him. The river may be the only thing that can unbind him. We have to try. Dan shook his head, frustration clear in his voice. Try? Christine, the journal literally says spill the marked one's blood. That could mean killing her. Alison stood between them, her pale face lit by the lamplight. She pulled back her sleeve, exposing the spiraled mark. It had grown darker, the lines sharper, almost carved into her flesh. She swallowed. If I don't do this, then he wins anyway. He'll use me. He'll come back through me. Christine's voice broke. What if we lose you in the process? Alison looked at her best friend with tears in her eyes. Then at least Riverston won't lose anyone else. Dan cursed under his breath, slamming a fist against the railing of the bridge. There has to be another way. There has to. But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. That night, Alison stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Her eyes looked sunken, tired, older somehow. She raised her wrist. For a moment, she swore the spirals on her skin shifted, twisting into a shape like an open eye. She dropped her hand, trembling. A whisper filled her ears, so clear she almost felt Elias standing behind her. Don't fear the river. Fear yourself. She spun, but no one was there. Only the dark hallway behind her. The next day, Christine found something new in the journal's final pages, a note almost hidden in faded ink. Beware the false sacrifice. The river accepts truth only. If the marked one offers freely, the sea drowns. If offered by force, he rises stronger. Christine's hand shook as she showed Alison and Dan. It has to be your choice, she whispered. No one can force it. If you go into the river with doubt, it'll unleash him instead of ending him. Alison stared at the words. A strange calm settled over her. Then that's it. I have to choose. And I already have. Dan grabbed her shoulders, his eyes fierce. No, I won't let you throw your life away. Not for him. Not for this town. Alison met his gaze, her voice steady but soft. It's not about throwing my life away. It's about making it mine again. That evening, the three of them prepared. Christine gathered candles and chalk to mark the riverbank, symbols from the journal's drawings. Dan carried the metal rod still stained from the night of the chapel, refusing to let go of the only weapon he trusted. Alison wore a black jacket, her sleeve rolled up, the mark glowing faintly beneath the night sky. As they walked toward the river, the wind howled low and mournful, like a warning. The town behind them slept, unaware of the war being fought for its soul. When they reached the bank, Alison stepped forward first. The river raged dark and endless, reflecting nothing, swallowing the moonlight as if it despised the sky. She shivered, but did not turn away. Christine lit the candles, their flames flickering wildly in the wind. Dan stood beside Alison, gripping her hand tightly. If you go in there, he said, voice rough, you'd better come back out. Alison managed a small, sad smile. I'll try. She took a deep breath, stared into the black water, and whispered, I choose. She stepped toward the river, the shadow over the town. The river hissed like a living thing as Alison stood at its edge. The candles Christine had lit bent and flickered, their flames bowing toward the dark water as if pulled by an unseen hand. The mark on Alison's wrist pulsed in rhythm with the current, glowing faintly like a coal buried beneath her skin. Christine crouched behind her, chalking symbols into the dirt, spirals, circles, and runes copied from a journal. Her hand shook, but her voice was steady as she murmured the words written in the margins, a prayer or maybe a warning. Dan stood close to Alison, the iron rod gripped tight in his fist. His jaw clenched. The second I see something go wrong, I'm pulling you out. I don't care what the book says. Alison nodded faintly, but inside she knew. If he pulled her out too soon, Elias would win. This had to be finished. Her choice, her blood, her will. She stepped into the river. The water was freezing, biting in her skin like teeth. It pulled at her legs, dragging her deeper, but she kept walking until it reached her waist. The mark on her wrist flared, so bright she could see its glow beneath the surface, spirals twisting like they were alive. She raised her arm, her voice trembling but loud. By river's claim, by soul's release, I break this bond. The current surged violently, waves rising as though the water itself had heard her call. Christine shouted the words from the journal, her voice cracking but determined. Dan waited in a step, ready to fight the river itself if he had to. Then came the voice. Deep, cold, everywhere. Yes, bleed for me. The mark burned like fire. Alison gasped as a thin line of blood slipped from her wrist, not from a cut, but from the symbol itself, as though it had opened on its own. The river swallowed it greedily, dark ripples spiraling outward. Christine screamed over the roar. Keep going. Don't stop. Alison forced herself to speak, though her body shook violently. By my choice, not yours, I drowned the seed. The river erupted. Black shapes rose from the water. Hands, arms, pale faces screaming silently. Elias's lost followers. They clawed at Alison, pulling, dragging, but she stood her ground, her feet sinking into the mud. And then he came. Elias Crow rose from the center of the current, towering, his form half shadow, half flesh. His eyes blazed white-hot, his mouth twisting into a snarl. You think you command the river? You think you choose? You are mine, child of light. Your blood, is my resurrection. The river surged higher, waves slamming against the bank, nearly dousing Christine's candles. Dan ran forward into the water, swinging the iron rod, striking at the shadow arms that reached for Alison. "Alison, fight him," he shouted. "It's your choice, not his." Alison raised her arms against the storm, the marks searing her flesh like molten iron. Her scream tore through the night. "I am not yours." The river glowed, not dark but bright, a blinding white light bursting from the water. The shadow faces shrieked as they dissolved into the current, their chains breaking. Elias roared, his body unraveling, his form tearing apart like smoke in a gale. "No, you cannot. You are mine." The mark on Alison's wrist exploded in searing light. Pain ripped through her, stealing her breath, but she did not falter. She pressed her bleeding wrist into the water and shouted the final words. "Be drowned forever." The river swallowed Elias's scream. His form collapsed into shards of shadow, ripped apart, dragged down into the depths. The water churned wildly, then stilled. The candles flickered once and then burned steady. Alison collapsed into Dan's arms as the river went silent. Christine dropped to her knees, crying with relief. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." But Alison, trembling in Dan's grip, opened her eyes and whispered something that made both their hearts freeze. "No, he's still inside me." The shadow over the town. The night was still again. Too still. The candles on the riverbank burned clean and steady, their flames no longer bending toward the water. The river itself flowed calmly, as though nothing had ever disturbed it. To Christine, it looked like victory. To Dan, it felt like survival. But to Alison, it felt wrong. Her body trembled violently in Dan's arms, her breath shallow, her skin pale as ash. He held her tighter. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice breaking. "It's done. He's gone. You did it." Christine wiped her tears, trying to steady her voice. The mark looked. They all stared at Alison's wrist. The spiraled symbol was fading, the lines dissolving into her skin like ink dropped into water. Relief washed over them, but only for a moment, because Alison's eyes suddenly widened. She gripped Dan's shirt with desperate strength, her voice raw. "No, he's still inside me." Her words froze them. Dan looked into her eyes, and his stomach turned cold. They weren't the same soft brown he had always known. They flickered, just for a second, with a pale glow. The walk back to town was silent, heavy. Christine kept glancing at Alison, her face pale in the moonlight. Alison stumbled more than once, her head heavy as if carrying a weight no one else could see. Dan kept his hand around hers, unwilling to let go, but fear gnawed at him. At Alison's house, she collapsed on her bed. Sweat clung to her forehead. She stared at the ceiling, whispering to herself. Dan leaned close, straining to hear. Her lips moved with words not her own. "Child of light, the vessel is mine." Dan recoiled, his chest tight. Christine gripped his arm. He's still speaking through her. Alison suddenly turned her head, her eyes locking on them. For a heartbeat, it wasn't Alison's gaze at all. It was Elias's, sharp and burning, full of hunger. Her voice dropped lower, 2 tones at once. "Did you think drowning me would end me? You opened the door wider. You gave me more." Dan's heart slammed to his chest. "Get out of her," he shouted. Alison convulsed, arching off the bed, then gasped and fell limp. When she opened her eyes again, she was herself. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I can feel him," she whispered. "He's buried in me, like a seed that won't die." The river didn't wash him away. It planted him deeper. The days that followed grew worse. Alison tried to go about her life, but the whispers grew louder. At work, she sometimes blacked out for minutes at a time, coming back to find customers staring at her with confusion or fear. Christine walked her home every night, afraid to leave her alone. Dan researched obsessively, tearing through books, folklore, even church records. Every night he came back with stacks of notes, but nothing gave him what he wanted, a way to cut Elias out of Alison completely. Alison herself began to change. She ate less. She grew weaker. And sometimes her reflection in mirrors didn't move in sync with her. Christine noticed it first. One afternoon, Alison sat at her vanity, brushing her hair. Christine, standing behind her, gasped. The mirror Alison smiled, but the real Alison wasn't smiling at all. Christine grabbed her hand. Ollie, we don't have much time. That night, Alison gathered them both. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her voice was calm. Too calm. He's waiting, she said softly. He's growing. Every day, I feel him pushing harder. He doesn't just want to rise. He wants me. My body. My soul. He wants to wear me like a mask. Dan slammed his fist on the table. We're not letting that happen. There has to be something. Another ritual, another way. Alison shook her head. The journal said it. The river breaks the bond only if the marked one offers freely. I did, and it weakened him, but it didn't kill him. Maybe nothing can. Christine's voice trembled. Then what do we do? Alison lifted her head, her eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. We don't wait for him to take me. We go where it began, not the bridge, not the chapel. Deeper, the place where Elias Crow first touched the river. His real altar. Dan frowned. And where the hell is that? Alison's lips curled into a small, haunting smile. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and when she spoke, it wasn't only her voice, it was Elias's too. I can show you. The shadow over the town. The air grew colder as Alison led them out of town that night. Christine clutched her flashlight like a lifeline, and Dan carried the same iron rod he had refused to leave behind. Neither of them spoke much. The silence between them was thick with fear. Alison walked a few paces ahead, her steps steady, almost too steady. She didn't even glance at the path. It was as if something inside her knew exactly where to go. The woods surrounding Riverston stretched black and endless, branches like skeletal arms reaching for them. The moon was only a thin sliver, offering little light. Dan whispered sharply. Alison, stop for a second. Where exactly are you taking us? She turned to face him. Her eyes glinted faintly, catching the flashlight beam. For a moment, her expression was her own, tired, sad, determined. But then her lips twitched, curling into a smile that wasn't hers. To the place you fear most, she said, her voice layered with Elias's. Christine's grip tightened on Dan's arm. He's speaking through her again. Alison blinked, her face softening back into herself. No, she whispered. It's me. I promise. I can feel him pointing the way. If we're going to end this, we have to see it through. Dan clenched his jaw, but didn't argue. The deeper they went, the more unnatural the forest became. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of moss and something older, metallic like rusting iron. The ground squelched beneath their feet as though the earth itself were rotting. And then the whispers began. At first, faint like wind slipping through dead leaves. But soon clearer, voices that overlapped, chanting in low tones. Dan spun in place, holding the rod defensively. Christine raised the flashlight, but the beam seemed to dim as though swallowed by the air. Alison, Christine's voice shook. Where are we? Alison's answer was almost reverent. The hollow. His altar lies ahead. They broke through a tangle of branches into a clearing, and there it was. A circle of ancient stones stood half buried in the earth, their surfaces carved with spirals and symbols like those from the chapel. In the center was a slab of rock, blackened and cracked, smeared with stains that time had not erased. Around it, the ground sank into a shallow basin filled with stagnant water, dark as ink. Christine's stomach twisted. Oh my God, people really died here. Alison stepped closer. Her body swayed as though pulled by invisible strings. The mark on her wrist burned bright, glowing like fire. She placed her hand on the stone, and the forest seemed to shudder. Dan grabbed her arm. Don't touch it. But Alison's voice was no longer her own. This is where eternity began. The stone flared faintly under her hand. The stagnant water rippled though no wind touched it. Shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, coiling like smoke, taking on faint human shapes, the followers of Elias, still bound. Their mouths opened, but no sound came. Christine clutched the journal to her chest, flipping to the pages of symbols. Dan, look at this. This isn't just an altar. It's a doorway. Dan's face hardened, and Elias wants her to open it. Alison turned slowly, her eyes glowing faintly, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't hers at all. He doesn't want me to open it. Her voice echoed with Elias's. He wants us to step through. The ground shook, the shadows closed in, and the doorway began to open. The shadow over the town. The earth trembled beneath their feet. The blackened altar glowed faintly, lines of fire crawling across its surface like veins. The stagnant pool around it began to swirl, its water sinking into the stone as though being drained away. A low hum filled the clearing, not of insects, not of wind, but of voices. Dozens, maybe hundreds, layered over one another, chanting words in a language older than the town itself. Christine dropped to her knees, frantically flipping through the journal, her flashlight shaking in her hands. It's a ritual. He's trying to complete what he started. The altar isn't just a doorway. It's a binding point. If it opens, Dan cut her off, his voice harsh. If it opens, we're screwed. That's all I need to know. He lifted the iron rod, gripping it like a weapon. We smashed the damn thing. Now. But Alison stood between him and the altar. Her wrist burned so brightly the spirals looked branded into her flesh. Her eyes glowed faintly as she whispered, almost dreamlike. It wants me. It's calling me. Dan's voice broke. That's not you talking, Ollie. That's him. Christine grabbed Alison's shoulders, tears running down her cheeks. Don't listen. If you step into that altar, if you give him what he wants, he'll tear through you and come back. Please, fight it. Alison blinked, her face flickering between exhaustion and something darker, hungrier. I don't know if I can fight it, she admitted, her voice shaking. He's inside me. I feel his thoughts, his hunger. She pressed her palm to her chest, gasping. Every second, he's digging deeper. The ground split with a sudden crack, and the center of the altar sank, revealing a pit of blackness beneath. It wasn't just shadow. It was endless, a void that seemed to swallow light itself. A stench of rot and old blood rose from it. The chanting grew louder. The shadows at the edge of the clearing shivered, their faceless heads turning toward Alison. One stepped forward, a gaunt figure in rags, its form made of smoke, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its mouth open wide, and this time sound came out. Join us. Christine screamed, stumbling back. More of them lurched forward, hands stretching, palms open as if begging. Alison's breath hitched. She recognized their faces. The same faces she had seen in her dreams. The lost ones, Elias's followers, his victims. Alison, Christine sobbed. They're not real. They're shadows. Don't let him trick you. But Alison wasn't sure. Their eyes seemed too full of pain, too desperate. What if they were real? Bound forever in Elias's grip. Could she leave them? Dan roared, swinging the rod. It cracked against the stone altar, sparks flying. The glowing veins pulsed brighter, but the altar did not break. Instead, the pit widened, sucking in the shadows at its edge, their screams echoing as they were dragged down. The forest shook violently. Branches snapped overhead. The air grew colder and sharper, stabbing at their lungs. And then, he appeared. From a pit, a shape rose. Tall, cloaked in smoke, its body half-formed, its face flickering between shadow and flesh. Elias Crow. His eyes glowed white, his mouth stretched in a cruel grin. The vessel has brought me home. Alison staggered, clutching her chest. Her voice was weak, but determined. I didn't bring you. I came to end you. Elias laughed, the sound shaking the trees. You cannot end what has already begun. You are mine, Alison. Through you I rise. The altar flared, the pit surging upward like a storm. The doorway was opening wider. Dan grabbed Alison's arm, pulling her back. Then we end this here. Christine's voice shook as she read desperately from a journal. Her words barely audible over the storm of voices. The altar can be sealed only by sacrifice freely given. She stopped, her face going pale. Dan turned sharply. Sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? Christine's hands trembled around the book. Not blood this time. Not pain. It says the vessel must give up what Elias craves most. Willingly. Alison's heart thundered. She already knew the answer. Elias wanted her. Her soul. The wind howled, Elias's shadow towering over them, his form growing more solid by the second. The pit yawned wider, pulling at her feet. Alison looked at her friends, her voice breaking. If I step into that altar, it'll close. But I might not come back. Christine shook her head violently, sobbing. No, there has to be another way. Dan grabbed her wrist, his eyes burning with desperation. Ollie, don't you dare. You hear me? We'll find another way. We'll fight him together. But Alison's gaze never left the altar. The void seemed to whisper her name. And somewhere deep inside, Elias's voice purred. Yes, child. Come home. The shadow over the town. The clearing was chaos. The ground trembled with every heartbeat. The altar split wide, the void beneath it sucking in air, shadows, even sound. The chanting was deafening now, a chorus of the damned, their voices dragging Alison's name into every syllable. Christine clutched the journal so tightly her knuckles turned white. Don't listen to him, Ollie. That's all he wants, for you to step in. Dan pulled Alison back by the arm, but she resisted, her eyes locked on the altar. Her mark burned so hot it seared her skin, glowing bright enough to cast light across her face. She could feel Elias inside her, pushing, clawing, whispering. One step. That's all it takes. Give yourself, and you will free them all. You will be remembered. The shadows around the clearing swayed, arms stretched toward her as if urging her forward. Alison's heart cracked at the sight of them. Hollow-eyed children, weeping women, men broken by terror. Victims or illusions, she didn't know, but their pain felt real. Dan stepped in front of her, his chest heaving, his voice raw. Don't even think about it, Ollie. This is what he wants. You jump, he wins. You hear me? He wins. Alison's lips trembled. And if I don't, if I let this doorway stay open, how many more disappear? How many more souls get trapped? Christine shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. There has to be another way. The book. Maybe there's something we missed. But her voice faltered as she read the last line of the journal, scrawled in frantic, faded ink. The altar feeds on the vessel. Only when the vessel denies the shadow will the doorway starve. Christine's voice dropped to a whisper. It doesn't say destroy, it says deny. Dan's eyes widened. Then that's it. Ollie, you don't have to step in. You just have to say no. Don't give him what he wants. The forest shook with Elias's laugh. It was louder than thunder, cruel and mocking. Fools! Do you think words can bind me? Do you think denial can starve what is already fed? She is mine. Her soul sings to me. The more she resists, the sweeter her surrender will be. His form rose higher, towering over the clearing, smoke and flesh twisting together. His eyes blazed, locking on Alison. You cannot deny me, child of light. You're already mine. Alison's legs buckled. She fell to her knees, clutching her wrist as the mark burned like fire. Her scream tore through the clearing. Christine ran to her, grabbing her shoulders, sobbing. Fight him, Ollie. Please, don't let him in. Through the agony, Alison heard another sound, faint, buried beneath Elias's roar. A voice, soft and fragile. Thank you, she gasped, lifting her head. The shadows of the lost were no longer pleading toward Elias. They were looking at her. Their hands, once reaching for her like chains, now lifted in quiet farewell. Their eyes held hope. Alison understood. The sacrifice wasn't stepping into the altar. It wasn't death. It was refusal. She forced herself to her feet, her body trembling, blood dripping from her palm where her nails had dug into flesh. She stared into Elias's burning eyes. Her voice cracked but rose with strength. I deny you. The mark seared white hot. Elias shrieked, his form ripping like torn fabric. No, you cannot. Alison stepped closer to the altar, the void roaring beneath her. The shadow over the town. The forest was dead silent. The wind had stopped. The trees stood still, and even the insects seemed to hold their breath. The altar lay cracked and lifeless, its black stone dull in the moonlight. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that waits, heavy and watchful. Dan knelt in the dirt, holding Alison upright against him. Her skin was pale, slick with sweat, her breathing shallow. The scar on her wrist glowed faintly, no longer a mark, but not fully gone either, like an ember buried deep. Christine crouched beside them, clutching the journal like it might still hold an answer. "We did it," she said shakily, her voice fragile with hope. "The altar's closed. The void's gone. It has to be over." But Alison's eyes fluttered open, and the look in them froze Christine's words in her throat. They weren't the eyes of someone free. They were the eyes of someone listening. Alison's lips trembled as she whispered, "He's quieter now, but he's still there. Inside me." Dan's heart sank. "Ollie, no. You fought him. You denied him. He's gone." Alison shook her head weakly. "Not gone. Not whole. Pieces of him are still in me. His voice, it's faint, but it's there. Like an echo." Christine's hand shook as she flipped through the journal again. "Maybe that's normal. Maybe he can't hurt you anymore. Maybe he's just residue." But Alison looked at her with hollow eyes. Residue doesn't whisper. The walk back to town was slow, heavy. Dan supported Alison's weight, while Christine walked ahead with the flashlight. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves made them flinch. When they finally emerged from the woods, the sight of the quiet streets of Riverston should have comforted them. But instead, it felt unreal. Too normal for what they had just faced. At Alison's house, Christine insisted she rest. They laid her in bed, drawing the curtains tight. For the first time in weeks, Alison fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. But Dan and Christine sat in the kitchen, unable to leave, unable to relax. "She's not free," Christine whispered, staring at the journal on the table. "We didn't kill him. We just trapped him somewhere new." Dan clenched his fists. "Then we find another way. We don't stop until she's safe. I don't care if I have to burn every cursed rock in this town." Christine looked at him, her eyes wide. What if she isn't just carrying him? What if she's becoming him? The silence between them said more than words could. That night, Alison dreamt. She was in the chapel again, but it wasn't ruined. It stood tall, whole, its pews filled with shadowy figures. At the pulpit stood Elias Crow, but his face wasn't his. It was hers. Her body, her eyes, her voice, speaking words she didn't choose. "I denied you," she said, though it came out in two voices, hers and his. Elias, wherein her face smiled. "And in doing so, you welcomed me." She woke with a start, her throat raw from a scream she hadn't realized escaped her. And in the darkness of her room, she heard it. Not outside, not in a dream, but inside her head. "You cannot silence me forever." Alison pulled her knees to her chest, rocking slightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered to herself over and over, as if the words could protect her. "I'm not yours. I'm not yours. I'm not yours." But deep down, she wasn't sure if that was still true. The shadow over the town. Alison spent the following week in a haze of exhaustion. She rarely left her room, and when she did, her steps were slow, her face pale, as if she were carrying a sickness no doctor could name. Dan and Christine stayed close, refusing to let her be alone, but both of them could see the truth written on her every movement. Elias Crow had not been destroyed. He lingered in her, faint but steady, like a parasite feeding on her spirit. On the seventh night, the whispers grew louder. Alison lay in bed, her hands clutched to her ears, but it didn't help. His voice was in her blood, her breath, her bones. "You are my vessel. You cannot deny me forever. The people will listen to you. Through you, I will be remembered." She staggered from her bed, barely able to stand, and stumbled into the night. Dan and Christine, hearing the door creak open, followed quickly. The streets of Riverston were empty, the town asleep. Alison walked barefoot toward the bridge, her hair wild, her eyes unfocused. Dan caught up to her, grabbing her arm. "Ollie, stop. Where are you going?" Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He wants me there." Where it all began. Christine's heart dropped. The bridge. When they reached it, the river roared below, restless, as if stirred by something unseen. Alison stepped to the center, the same place where she had first seen the shadow. She lifted her scarred wrist, and to their horror, the mark pulsed faintly once more, glowing red like a heartbeat. The wind rose, carrying faint whispers through the town, voices that weren't supposed to exist. Windows rattled. Dogs barked in the distance. The town was stirring in its sleep. Christine clutched the journal. He's using her. If this keeps going, he'll spread. Not just through her, but through all of Riverston. Dan shook his head, his jaw set. Then we stop him. Right here. Tonight. Alison collapsed her knees on the bridge, sobbing. I can't fight him anymore. He's too strong. Dan knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. Yes, you can. He doesn't own you. You beat him before, you can beat him again. Not with blood, not with rituals, but with yourself. Your choice. Christine's voice rose with desperate clarity. That's what the journal meant by denial. Not just once, always. Every day, every moment. He feeds on surrender. If you never surrender, he can never rise. Alison looked at them both through tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. What if I'm not strong enough? Dan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Then we'll carry the weight with you. You're not alone. Christine knelt beside them, placing her hand on Alison's scar. He'll whisper forever, Ollie. But whispers can't control you unless you listen. The river's roar grew deafening. A shadow rose faintly in the water below, Elias's form flickering, reaching. Alison stood, shaking, and faced it. She raised her wrist high and screamed with everything left inside her. I am not yours. The mark flared white. The shadow below writhed, twisted, and dissolved back into the water. The air split with a final shriek. Elias's voice, enraged, desperate. You cannot deny me forever. Alison shouted back, her voice breaking. Then I will deny you every day until I die. The sound cracked the night. Then silence. The river calmed. The wind stilled. The whispers faded. Alison fell into her friend's arms, exhausted but alive. The mark on her wrist was nothing more than a faint scar now, cold to the touch. Christine pressed her forehead against Alison's. You did it. You really did. Dan smiled faintly, though his eyes carried the weight of everything they'd seen. He's gone. Maybe not forever, but gone enough. Alison looked out over the river. The water flowed quietly like it always had, but she knew she would hear his voice again, faint and distant, lurking in the shadows of her mind. And when it came, she would deny him, again and again, because Elias Crow would never win. Not while she still breathed. The end.